Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives: jobs, debts, incomes, those we face and those our children are having to think about more and more with each passing week. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I hope that has prepared me well to go over the events of each week as we do on this program. So let me jump right into the economic updates for this week. I want to talk about the state of Maine. I don't talk about it that often, but it deserves an analysis because of some courageous and innovative things that are going on there in the realm of economics. And I'm indebted to my friends at inequality.org for having gathered this material, and if you're interested in more details, that's where you should go. Maine is becoming a very interesting place. On the one hand, it has arguably the most right-wing governor in the state, in the whole country. On the other hand, it is doing things that are very progressive, and its legislature and its people are in the forefront of such things. In 2016, for example, voters approved ballot proposals to raise the state's minimum wage, to raise taxes on the wealthy to fund education, and to legalize marijuana. Kind of interesting that the state of Maine would do that. But that wouldn't have been enough for me to bring it to your attention. I wanted to make it clear that these progressive steps are the result of systematic, organized political work being done by the Maine People's Alliance. They are the ones who deserve the credit for raising these issues, for educating the Maine population about them, reaching all over the state, explaining what's going on. And they've just launched another campaign, which I find extraordinarily interesting, as a way for committed, interested people in a state to really make a difference. Here's what they're going to do. They are going to put another landmark issue on the 2018 ballot. They call it universal home care for the disabled and the elderly. Maine, out of the 50 states, has the highest median age. In other words, it has a disproportionately large number of elderly and probably also disabled citizens. Caring for this aging population is expensive. The median annual cost, median being 50% above and 50% below, the median annual cost for home care is over $50,000 per year. And that's about on a par with Maine's median income for an entire household. How in the world, if a household depends on $50,000 a year, are they ever going to pay to take care of an elderly mother or father, etc., when it costs the total amount? And what's worse is that Medicare does not cover the costs of in-home care. And the Medicaid reimbursement rates are so poor that employers are unwilling or unable to find workers who will do the work for the low level of reimbursement offered by Medicare. So the problem is, how are you going to care for the elderly? Which is, after all, one of the ways you measure how well an economic system serves the people who live in it, if you're able to take care of the elderly who've given a lifetime of work and service, and the disabled. The Maine People's Alliance proposes to do the following. If the vote passes, it will raise $132 million to take care of a proper maintenance for the elderly and the disabled. How would they raise the $132 million? A payroll tax of 1.9% levied only on annual salaries and wages above $127,000 per year, and a 3.7% tax on investment income, again, only if it is more than $127,000 a year. In other words, these are taxes, very small, but targeted at the rich. Why the $127,000? The answer is itself an important story. That's the maximum that you earn now upon which Social Security is withheld from your check. Social Security system works by taking a certain percentage from you, matched by your employer, but only up to the first $127,000. Which means if you're very wealthy and you earn above that, all of the money you earn above that, which can add up to millions, has no Social Security tax taken from it. So it struck the people in Maine as reasonable, since those who earn a lot escape in much of their income from the taxes of Social Security, and therefore it also follows that the very wealthy are not affected by sales taxes the way low and middle income people are, because if you're very rich and have a big income, the sales taxes you pay are a small percentage compared to what they would be if you're not rich. So taking all this into account, they've decided to tax those who are most able to pay, the same principle that governs the income tax, the federal income tax in the United States. And given the success they've had in the past, it will be very interesting to see whether this program of taxing only the richest to provide something that the whole of society will benefit from, namely care for the elderly and the disabled, will it succeed in the state of Maine. My next update is really very simple and very brief. It's to let you know, and which may come as a surprise, that the United States Senate, and in particular the United States Senate Finance Committee, just issued in the middle of October a report on estate tax abuses. What do I mean? I mean the way wealthy people in the United States, and we're talking about 0.0001%, how they escape the estate tax, which only they are required to pay, since we've exempted 11 or 12 million of everybody's estate from any federal estate tax already. And the Trump administration proposes to eliminate the rest, which is eliminating a significant tax on the wealthiest people in the country. Well, it turns out those people have already been evading the tax for years by using special loopholes, all kinds of tax rulings. And I've told you that in the past, but what I found remarkable was that the U.S. Senate Finance Committee issued a report dated October 12th, which documents in detail all of the evasion schemes that have gotten the wealthiest in America out of paying their estate tax. Here's the name of the document if you're interested in looking for it. And the way to find it is to go to www.finance.senate.gov. Finance, Senate, Gov, you'll get you right to it. Here's the name of the report, the title: Estate Tax Schemes. Here's the subtitle: How America's Most Fortunate Hide Their Wealth, Flout Tax Laws, and Grow the Wealth Gap. That's right, a document issued by the U.S. Senate Finance Committee showing the anger of those senators because the evasion of taxes by the richest really is very gross. I want to turn next to an update on a story we've covered before, but it continues to amaze. This has to do with Flint, Michigan. You know the problem of Flint. In the aftermath of the crash of 2008, in a city that was already the largest bankruptcy in American history, Detroit, the neighboring city of Flint, Michigan, to save money, diverted from using the Detroit River as its water source to the Flint River. That water was polluted by very old lead pipes. It was drunk by all kinds of adults and children in Flint. disproportionate part of them being African American, causing brain damage, illnesses of all kinds, a horrible story. You know that story. I am not going to repeat it. What's new is it turns out that here we are, years after this crisis blew up, and Flint continues to suffer from polluted water. Large numbers of its citizens have to have bottled water brought in or tank water brought in. It's a very serious problem. 2 hours away from Flint by car is a little town called Evart, E-V-A-R-T, Evart, Michigan. Population 1,500 people, a really little place. But in that place, something extraordinary is going on. The Nestle Corporation, one of the largest food conglomerates in the world that produces all kinds of things around the world. It pays $200 a year to pump water out of the ground under Evart, Michigan, out of an aquifer there. It bottles the water. It sells the water throughout the Midwest, including to people in Flint, Michigan. Flint has high water bills, dangerous water. But at the same time that the people of Flint have suffered for years without adequate access to clean water, which the UN calls a human right, a private profit corporation 2 hours away pumps all the clean water it wants to make profit by bottling it and selling it to everybody else. Something is terribly wrong with this picture I've just painted for you, isn't it? Profit gets the water, and the people get the pollution. A system that works like this has lost its right to continue. This story was carried, the first news of it that came to me, in the British newspaper, The Guardian. Isn't it interesting that The Guardian would capture this particular update of the Flint water disaster? Before I turn to my next update, let me remind you that we maintain 2 websites which are there for your use, for you to partner with us in spreading the word of what you learn on this program, what insights we are able to share with you. Use these websites, please. That's why we update them every day with new materials, as a way to partner with us and share the information. The first website is rdwolf with 2fs.com, and the second one is democracyatwork, that's all one word, democracyatwork.info. Both websites allow you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and YouTube. Both of those websites allow you to communicate with us what you like and don't like. Make use of them. That's why they're there. And they're available 24/7 and no charge. For those of you listening to the program who might also want to see it as a television program, please know that you can go to patreon.com, Patreon, patreon.com/economic update, and then the program will be available to you in a fully televised video format. There is a term being used in Europe to cope with the problems the Europeans have had since the crash of 2008. It has become widespread now across the world among researchers and scholars and activists trying to come up with a term that captures the economic crises in which so many people have been mired since 2008. And the term is social exclusion. What does that mean? Basically, it means that your income is so low that you can't really participate in a regular life with the food, the clothing, the shelter, the transportation, the education, the health care that you need if you're going to be included in the community's life. You are, in a sense, being pushed to the margins of this society. You are suffering social exclusion. And there are complicated measurements that are made to get at that. I thought you'd be interested in how a number of European countries fare when you look through the lens of social exclusion. Perhaps the most dramatic statistic was the following. 35.5% of the entire population of Greece lived in social exclusion last year, 2016. That's over a third. By comparison, in 2008, the last year before the full impact of the capitalist crash hit, the percentage of social exclusion in Greece was 28%. So they've gone from 28 to 35. That's not a recovery, friends. That's a society who is excluding ever more people across the entire 10 years since that crisis hit. The average across all of the EU, the European Union, was 23.4%. It's bad enough. But that was roughly the same as 2008. So across Europe as a whole, it hasn't gotten any better, but it hasn't gotten any worse, but not for Greece. If you want the technical definition of social inclusion, you can get it from Eurostat. That's the agency that keeps the basic economic statistics for all of Europe. A person living in poverty or social exclusion is measured as earning less than 60% of the average national income. That is when people are unable to procure basic consumer goods or to fulfill basic financial obligations. The two worst countries in Europe, where social exclusion is at 40.4 and 38.8%, that is even worse than Greece, were Bulgaria and Romania. Finally, at the other end, here are the three countries that had the lowest percentage of social exclusion. Number one in Europe, the Czech Republic. That part of the former Czechoslovakia, 13.3%, excluded the smallest percentage of its population. That might surprise you. The next two countries that didn't exclude very many, but not quite as good as the Czech Republic, were Finland and Denmark. That will be less of a surprise. It would be interesting if we had serious social exclusion data for the United States, and I'm working on that. The next economic update has to do with two health programs in the United States that are a little bit below the radar these days because of so much attention devoted to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and the Trump and Republican Party's effort to overthrow all of that. While everybody was debating and looking at that, two existing health care programs in the United States were set to expire on the 30th of September 2017, and expire they did. And unless the Congress, now run by the GOP and together with Mr. Trump, unless they move to reinstate these programs, they will stop. So let me tell you about the two of them, since very little publicity was given. The first is the CHIP program, CHIP, which stands for Children's Health Insurance Program. Okay? It insures, if my data are correct, something on the order of several millions. I'm just checking here to get it to you. I don't have it in front of me, sorry. But there are several million children that have been helped. I think it was 8 or 9 million children across the United States helped by this program. By letting it run out, you are, of course, depriving these children and their families of the financial support needed to get health insurance. The other one is the federally qualified health centers. This one really struck me, and here I have the data in front of me. 9,500 locations. That's health clinics and health centers around the United States, particularly in rural areas, are qualified to get help from the federal government to serve 27 million people. These are people who live often far from hospitals or developed medical care centers, and they have been helped for years by the federal government, as was the Children's Health. Both of these programs expired on the 30th of September. In many states, there are reserves being used to keep them going. But without federal help, that will stop in a month or so at the end of this year. The Kaiser Family Foundation is very concerned, believes that this is a major blow to the health care of many Americans. And if you look at where these health care centers are located and where the children are that are helped, there's an interesting irony. A disproportionate number of these beneficiaries who are now deprived live in states that voted for Donald Trump for president. The Bloomberg News Service carried the next economic update. It points out, and of course this is hardly hot news, but then again, it's important when the Bloomberg service, which is the major provider of economic news to the business community in the United States and in many other parts of the world, when they write this, then it's kind of recognized. And here's their point. A story on the 20th of September. If you put together the impact of automation with the impact of outsourcing of jobs, that is, moving jobs out of the United States, the impact of those two things together, replacing jobs with machines and replacing jobs in the United States by having those jobs moved to another part of the world, the end result is that fewer people are working and that they're earning less than they used to. And the way economists measure that, it's called labor's share, the share of the total income in our country that working people get, people who work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, earning a wage. Labor share versus the profit share, or sometimes it's called capital share. The labor share, the capital share, the employees' share, the employer's share. Well, for years now, the labor share has been going down. The number of people in the laboring part of the society keeps going up, but the share of total income laboring people get goes down. You know what that means? If there's more and more of us sharing less and less, it means that the average economic situation of Americans is being pinched, lowered, reduced, squeezed, whatever word you like. And Bloomberg wants the business community to know about it. And the reason is not far to search for. With this kind of tearing a society apart into those who have and those who don't, those whose profit share is rising, giving them good times, versus those whose situation is being squeezed, so they suffer shrinking incomes, or maybe social exclusion, as we just finished talking about. The gap between these two is filled with bitterness, resentment, envy, anger, recrimination, and it becomes fertile soil to try to convince upset people that this or that group is the bad guy making this happen. The people who are different from you, the people who are immigrants, just like your ancestors were, those are the people you can now turn on to blame, but the reality is it's got nothing to do with immigrants or with African Americans or with any other of the convenient scapegoats of which we have had so many. It has to do with an economic system. And even Bloomberg understands it's the profit-driven decision to replace a worker with a machine, or the profit-driven decision to move a job out of the United States and give it to someone at a fraction of the wage in China or India or Brazil. It's a system driven by profit, the famous bottom line that dictates what happens, that is at the core of the inequality tearing the society apart. And Bloomberg lets its people know, because even Bloomberg is scared of where this division in the society is going, how far it will be allowed to go, and what the social consequences will be. And are there alternatives? Of course there are. A society that wanted to would not allow automation to happen in such a way that the worker suffers and the employer gets the benefit. Why not? Because there's no reason to do that in the first place, and secondly, the inequality that follows is a good reason not to do it. And to remind you, as we have done on this program, how could you manage this? The answer is so easy, it's a little awkward to have to repeat it. When a machine can make half the number of workers produce the same output compared to what before took all of the workers, we know what happens. The capitalist who buys the more efficient machine fires half the workers, because the remaining half, with the new machine, can produce as much as all of them produced before. Everything else is the same. But our employer has a wonderful situation. He has half the wage bill he used to have. The money that he used to give to half the workers, the ones he fired, he can now keep for himself. And that shows up as much higher profits. What's the alternative? Simple. You don't fire half the workers. You put all the workers on half-time. Gets you exactly the same result. The capitalist can continue paying them all, earning whatever profit he earned before. The technical change means that everybody who works there has half-time labor for the same wage. It's more leisure for every worker. If the benefit were more leisure for every worker, the majority would get the benefit. We have a system that fires half the workers and keeps it all in profit for the top. That's why we have a splitting society, and if we don't deal with that situation, it will continue. We've come to the end of the first half of Economic Update. After a short interlude, we will be right back. Stay with us. I think you'll find the material on the second half interesting.